Some places do not become legends because of what people see. They become legends because of what people refuse to explain. Deep inside an isolated forest stood a forgotten lake. There were no tourist signs, no boats, no fishing cabins, only silence. The locals called it Blackwater. Most maps barely mentioned it. Few people visited after sunset. Those who did rarely returned with the same expression they had before. Some never returned at all. The oldest story about the lake was strangely consistent. People claimed that if you looked into the water after midnight, someone would be looking back. Not your reflection, someone else. A stranger beneath the lake. Most dismissed it as another ghost story, until Daniel Mercer arrived. Daniel was a wildlife photographer. He spent months traveling through remote forests, documenting places few people had ever seen. He had no interest in ghost stories. He believed every mystery had an ordinary explanation. Fog, light, fear, human imagination. That confidence brought him to Blackwater Lake. He reached the shoreline shortly before sunset. The lake was perfectly still. Not even the wind disturbed its surface. Birds circled above the surrounding forest, but none landed near the water. Daniel noticed something unusual almost immediately. There were no insects, no frogs, no fish jumping. The forest was alive. The lake was silent. He unpacked his equipment, multiple cameras, tripods, night lenses, motion sensors. Everything was prepared before darkness arrived. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, the temperature dropped sharply. The air became heavy. Fog slowly rolled across the surface. Daniel activated his first camera. Nothing. Just water. Minutes passed. Then another hour. Still nothing. Just before midnight, he decided to take a long exposure photograph toward the center of the lake. The camera shutter clicked. Several seconds later, the image appeared on the display. Daniel frowned. Something wasn't right. At first glance, the lake looked completely empty. Then he zoomed in. Near the center of the photograph was a faint human face beneath the surface. Eyes open, looking upward, perfectly still. Daniel immediately looked back at the lake. Nothing. Only black water. He examined the image again. The face remained. Perhaps debris. Perhaps an optical illusion. He repositioned the camera. Another photograph. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The face had vanished. He checked the first image several more times. Every detail remained exactly the same. The stranger was still there, watching. Daniel smiled nervously. There had to be an explanation. There always was. He packed away the camera and returned to his tent. Sleep never came. Throughout the night, he kept hearing something. Not footsteps. Not splashes. A slow movement across the water. As though someone was walking beneath the surface. Just before sunrise, the sounds stopped. Daniel stepped outside. The lake was calm once again. He walked to the shoreline. Fresh footprints covered the muddy ground. Only one set. They led toward the water. None came back. Daniel stared silently. They were not his. He looked across the lake. For a brief second, he thought he saw someone standing beneath the water. Not floating, standing, watching him. Then the surface became perfectly still again. Daniel raised his camera one more time. This time, the shutter refused to work. Daniel spent the entire morning trying to understand why his camera had failed. The battery was full. The memory card was empty, except for the strange photograph. Every function worked normally again. Only that single moment refused to make sense. He packed his gear and drove to the nearest town. It was nearly an hour away. The town looked forgotten. Old brick buildings, empty sidewalks, a small diner, a single gas station. Everyone seemed to know why he was there before he said a word. When he mentioned Blackwater Lake, conversation stopped. Eyes turned toward him. An elderly waitress quietly placed his coffee on the table. "You stayed there overnight?" Daniel nodded. She looked relieved. "You were lucky." Before Daniel could ask another question, she walked away. Later that afternoon, he visited the local library. Most records about the lake were stored in old newspaper archives. The first reports dated back more than 70 years. A fisherman disappeared. No boat was found. No body was recovered. The official report blamed strong underwater currents. Daniel frowned. The lake was known for being unusually calm. The explanation felt weak. He continued reading. 5 years later, a teenage couple vanished during a camping trip. Their tent remained untouched. Their food was still inside. Only the couple was gone. No signs of violence. No footprints leaving the campsite. Again, no bodies. Another report. A park ranger disappeared while investigating strange lights over the lake. His truck remained parked beside the shore. His radio was found still transmitting. His final message was short. "I think someone is in the water." The recording ended with silence. The search lasted 2 weeks. Nothing was found. As the years passed, the disappearances continued. A hunter, a kayaker, 2 hikers, a documentary filmmaker. Always near the lake, always without a trace. Daniel pinned every date onto a notebook. Something stood out immediately. The disappearances were not random. Almost every case happened within a few nights of the autumn full moon. Tonight was the beginning of that same cycle. Daniel returned to the diner. This time, an old man sitting alone called him over. "I heard you're asking about the lake." Daniel sat down. The man's name was Walter. He had lived in the town his entire life. Walter leaned closer. "My brother disappeared there." Daniel waited. "It was 43 years ago. We searched for 10 days. The police searched for another week. We found nothing." Walter reached into his wallet. Inside was an old faded photograph. 2 young brothers smiling beside Blackwater Lake. Daniel noticed something strange. In the background, far out on the water, a dark shape stood just beneath the surface. Walter saw Daniel staring. "I never noticed it until years later. I wish I never had." Daniel carefully compared the old photograph with his own. The shape appeared in almost the exact same location. The same height, the same posture. Impossible. Walter's hands began to shake. "I've seen that figure with my own eyes." "It doesn't swim. It waits." Daniel asked what he meant. Walter looked toward the window. His voice dropped to a whisper. "It watches until someone notices it. And once you do, it starts watching back." Daniel felt the room grow silent. He folded the photograph and handed it back. As he walked toward the exit, the waitress stopped him. She looked directly into his eyes. "If you go back tonight, don't look into the water. If someone down there looks like they're smiling, run." Daniel returned to Blackwater Lake before sunset. Walter's warning stayed with him the entire drive. He told himself it was only fear. Fear made ordinary things feel impossible. This time he brought more equipment. 2 night vision cameras, an infrared drone, a waterproof microphone, 3 motion sensors. If something was out there, he wanted proof. The forest was unusually quiet again. No birds, no insects, no wind, only the sound of his footsteps. He placed the first camera beside the dock. The second faced the center of the lake. The drone hovered above the water, recording everything below. For hours, nothing happened. Just after midnight, the underwater microphone captured a sound. Not splashing, not bubbles. It sounded like slow footsteps, one, then another, walking, beneath the lake. Daniel replayed the recording. The rhythm was too perfect. Someone, or something, was moving across the bottom. He launched the drone lower. Its infrared camera scanned the dark water. At first, nothing. Then a faint shape appeared. A human outline, standing perfectly still, 30 meters from the shore. Daniel froze. The figure did not move. The water around it remained completely calm. He zoomed in. The image became clearer. A person, arms hanging at the sides, head tilted slightly upward, looking directly at the drone. Then the video feed suddenly filled with static. 3 seconds later, the signal returned. The figure was gone. Daniel checked every camera. None had recorded the disappearance, only the brief appearance. He walked slowly toward the shoreline. The moon reflected across the water. Everything looked normal. Then he noticed another reflection. Someone was standing beside him. Daniel turned instantly. No one. He looked back into the lake. The second reflection was still there, standing next to his own. Slowly, the stranger turned its head toward him. Daniel stepped backward. The reflection vanished. His heartbeat raced. He forced himself to stay calm. There had to be an explanation. The next morning, Daniel visited Walter again. Walter listened without interrupting. Then he said there was one person Daniel needed to meet, the last living witness. They drove to a small farmhouse several miles outside town. An elderly woman opened the door. Her name was Eleanor. She had refused every interview for more than 50 years. When Daniel mentioned the lake, she became pale. She invited them inside. After several minutes of silence, she finally spoke. "I was 12. My father took me fishing. He told me to stay in the boat. He walked onto the dock. I looked into the water. I thought someone was standing underneath. I called my father. He looked down too. He smiled. Daniel frowned. Smiled. Eleanor nodded slowly. He climbed into the water. He wasn't forced. He wasn't pulled. He walked in like someone had called his name. I never saw him again. The room fell silent. Daniel asked if she remembered the face beneath the lake. Eleanor closed her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I wish I didn't. It wasn't a stranger. It looked exactly like my father. Daniel felt a chill run through his body. So what did your father see? Eleanor whispered her answer. I don't think he saw himself. I think something down there became him. Daniel left Eleanor's farmhouse with more questions than answers. If she was telling the truth, the figure beneath the lake did not always look the same. It changed. It became whoever its victim expected to see. That idea sounded impossible, but every new piece of evidence pushed reality a little further away. Walter called him later that afternoon. There is one place you've missed. The old ranger station. It had been abandoned for decades, hidden deep inside the forest. Daniel found it just before sunset. The wooden building leaned dangerously to one side. Broken windows stared into the trees. The front door hung open. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Maps still covered the walls. Rusted filing cabinets lined one corner. A calendar remained open. October. 47 years earlier. As if everyone had simply walked away. Daniel searched every room. Most records had rotted away. One cabinet was locked. The lock broke with little effort. Inside sat a small metal box. Wrapped in faded cloth, a leather journal. The cover read only one name. Ranger Thomas Hale. Daniel opened the first page. The handwriting was neat. The early entries described ordinary patrols, wildlife sightings, weather reports, routine maintenance. Then everything changed. The entries became shorter. More anxious, the birds no longer land near the lake. Fish keep washing ashore with no visible injuries. Something is making footsteps underwater every night. Daniel turned the page. I followed fresh footprints into the mud today. They stopped at the shoreline. Nothing came back. Another page. People report seeing family members standing beneath the surface. Each witness describes a different face. Daniel remembered Eleanor's father. The journal continued. I looked today. It was my wife. Daniel stopped reading. Thomas Hale's wife had died years before these entries. Yet he claimed to have seen her beneath the lake. The next pages became increasingly disturbing. She smiled at me. She asked me to come home. I almost walked into the water. Daniel felt the hairs on his arms rise. Someone had written one sentence across an entire page, over and over. Do not answer the voice. Do not answer the voice. Do not answer the voice. The final written entry was dated 3 days before Ranger Hale disappeared. It doesn't stay underwater anymore. Last night, I saw it standing between the trees. It watched the station until sunrise. It knows I'm writing this. If anyone finds these pages, never let it know you can see it. There were no more entries. Only one loose photograph tucked inside the back cover. Daniel held it beneath his flashlight. It showed Ranger Hale standing outside the station. He appeared exhausted. Behind him, between two trees, a dark figure watched from the forest. Not beneath the water, on dry land. Daniel's breathing slowed. The figure was blurry, but one detail remained perfectly clear, its face. It looked exactly like Thomas Hale. At that exact moment, a floorboard creaked upstairs. Daniel froze. He was certain he had entered the station alone. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps crossed the floor above him. The footsteps stopped. Daniel remained completely still. The ranger station fell silent again. He slowly climbed the narrow staircase. Each step groaned beneath his weight. The upper floor was empty. Dust covered every room. No footprints. No open windows. No place for anyone to hide. Yet the sound had been unmistakable. Someone had been walking above him. Daniel searched every corner before leaving the station. As he stepped outside, he looked toward Blackwater Lake. It was less than half a mile away. Even from that distance, the water seemed unnaturally dark. That night, he made a decision. If the answers were beneath the lake, he had to go beneath it. The following evening, Daniel returned with diving equipment. A dry suit, high-powered underwater lights, 2 backup oxygen tanks, a body camera, a safety line secured to the dock. No one knew he was there. He wanted complete control of the investigation. Just after sunset, he entered the water. The temperature dropped instantly. The cold was almost unbearable. His flashlight cut through only a few meters of darkness. Below him, nothing but black water. He continued downward. 5 meters, 10 meters, 15. The bottom slowly appeared through the darkness. Soft layers of mud covered everything. Then he saw the first object. A child's red rain boot, perfectly preserved. A few meters away, a rusted fishing rod. Then, a backpack. Its zipper was still closed. Daniel opened it carefully. Inside were dry notebooks sealed inside waterproof bags. The dates matched one of the missing hikers from 20 years earlier. The backpack should not have remained untouched for so long. He continued searching. The lake floor was covered with abandoned belongings. Watches, shoes, cameras, camping equipment, eyeglasses, a wedding ring, personal items from dozens of disappearances. But there was one thing missing: human remains. Not a single bone, not a single skeleton. It was as if the people themselves had simply vanished. Daniel photographed everything. Then his flashlight caught something strange. Fresh footprints, pressed into the mud. Perfect human footprints. He followed them. They stretched across the lake bottom, one step after another, as though someone had been walking there only moments earlier. The footprints ended at a large wall of stone. Daniel moved closer. It wasn't natural. The stones had been cut into straight lines, built by human hands. He brushed away layers of mud. An old stone staircase appeared, leading farther down. His pulse quickened. The historical records were true. There really had been something beneath the lake. He descended the staircase slowly. The water grew darker. His flashlight revealed the outline of buildings, collapsed roofs, broken chimneys, a church steeple rising from the darkness. An entire village rested beneath the lake, frozen in time. Then, his body camera emitted a sharp warning tone. Motion detected. Daniel turned. No one. He scanned every direction. Still nothing. The warning sounded again. This time, it came from directly behind him. He spun around. A cloud of silt drifted through the water. Within it, a human silhouette, standing perfectly still, watching him. Daniel raised his flashlight. The beam passed through the cloud. The figure disappeared. He took one step backward. His boot struck something. He looked down. Half buried in the mud lay a waterproof camera. Its recording light was still blinking. Daniel carefully picked up the camera. It should not have been working. The model was nearly 15 years old, yet the small red recording light continued to blink. He surfaced as quickly as he could. Back at his campsite, he dried the camera and removed the memory card. Against all odds, the files were still intact. There was only one video, no title, no date. Daniel pressed play. The recording began at the same dock where he had entered the lake. The cameraman never spoke. Heavy breathing filled the silence. The video slowly moved toward the water. Then, a voice whispered from somewhere off camera. "You finally came back." The cameraman stopped walking. No one was visible. The whisper came again, this time from the lake itself. "Come closer." The camera zoomed toward the center of the water. A person stood beneath the surface, perfectly still, watching. The camera's man whispered one word. "No." The figure smiled. The water around it never moved. Then the recording suddenly jumped. The cameraman was now standing waist-deep in the lake, as if several minutes had disappeared. He sounded confused. "I don't remember walking in." The whisper returned. One sentence. Again and again. "You know me. You know me. You know me." The camera shook violently. The figure beneath the water began walking forward. Not swimming, walking. Each step was slow, deliberate, impossible. The cameraman screamed. The video ended. Daniel checked the file information. There was no owner listed, no recording date, no location data. It was as if the camera had never existed. He compared the footage with his own drone recordings. Every measurement matched. The figure had appeared in the exact same place, the exact same depth, the exact same posture. Nothing had changed, not in years. Daniel enlarged one frame from the recovered video. His breathing stopped. The figure's face was visible for only a fraction of a second. It looked exactly like the missing cameraman. The same clothes, the same face, the same expression. Daniel remembered Eleanor's words. It becomes whoever it takes. He wanted another opinion. The next morning, he drove to the regional university. A professor of underwater archaeology agreed to examine the village photographs. She studied them for nearly an hour. Finally, she looked up. These buildings shouldn't exist. Daniel frowned. They're on every frame. She shook her head. No. I mean, they shouldn't exist there. She pulled out historical maps. The flooded settlement had been located almost a mile north of Blackwater Lake, not beneath its deepest point. The village Daniel had photographed was in the wrong place. Completely wrong. As they compared more images, another contradiction appeared. Every photograph showed a different street layout. Buildings had changed positions. Doors appeared where walls had been. The church steeple faced a different direction in every picture. It was impossible, unless the village itself was moving. Daniel drove back to the lake before sunset. He stood silently on the old dock. Across the still water, something broke the surface. Not a wave, not a fish, a human hand. It slowly rose above the lake. Then another. Someone was pulling themselves out of the water. 7. The buried truth. Daniel did not move. The hands gripped the edge of the old dock. Water dripped into the lake without making a sound. Then, they slipped back beneath the surface. No splash, no ripple, nothing. Daniel rushed forward. The wooden planks were wet. Fresh marks crossed the dock. 5 long scratches. As though fingernails had dragged across the wood. He photographed them. Minutes later, they were gone. The wood was perfectly clean. Daniel checked the photographs. The scratches were still visible in every image. Only the dock itself had changed. He knew he needed official records. If an entire village had once stood here, someone had approved its destruction. The next morning, he visited the county archives. Most files about the flooding project had been sealed. After hours of searching, one elderly archivist quietly handed him a damaged storage box. No one ever asks for these. Inside were engineering maps, construction reports, letters between government officials. Everything pointed to one project, a dam completed nearly 60 years earlier. According to the official documents, the valley had been empty. No residents, no buildings, no cemetery, nothing worth recording. Daniel unfolded another map. It showed something completely different. A town. Nearly 200 homes. A church. A school. A hospital. Even a cemetery. Someone had erased an entire community from history. At the bottom of the map was a handwritten note. Population relocated. No destination. No names. No signatures. Daniel searched deeper into the files. Most pages had been removed. Several had been burned. Only fragments remained. One sentence appeared repeatedly. Do not discuss Incident 9. There was no explanation. No description. Only those 3 words. Daniel copied every document. That evening, Walter arrived at the campsite. Daniel showed him the maps. Walter stared at them for a long time. My grandfather used to talk about a town. He said people disappeared before the flooding ever happened. He wasn't afraid of the water. He was afraid of what was already there. Daniel asked why no one had spoken publicly. Walter gave a tired smile. They did. No one believed them. As darkness covered the lake, Daniel decided to compare every piece of evidence he had collected. The old photographs, the journal, the missing camera, the engineering maps, something connected them all. Every image containing the mysterious figure had one identical detail. The figure always stood in exactly the same place, not in the middle of the lake, above the church. Daniel overlaid the historical map onto a satellite image. The location matched perfectly. The figure had been standing over the church for decades, almost as if it were guarding something beneath it. Daniel looked again at the final page of Ranger Hale's journal. He noticed a sentence he had overlooked, written faintly in the margin. The church was locked from the outside. Whatever they trapped inside was never meant to leave. Daniel slowly closed the journal. Across the lake, the old church bell rang. Once, the underwater village had no electricity, no people, no air. Yet the bell echoed through the forest. Then, a second bell answered. From somewhere behind him. Daniel turned instantly. The second bell had come from inside the forest. There was no church behind him, only rows of silent trees. The sound stopped. For several minutes, nothing moved. Then his phone vibrated. It was a notification from his cloud backup. New images had been uploaded automatically from his cameras. Daniel opened them. His blood ran cold. Every photograph had changed. The pictures he had taken earlier no longer looked the same. The shoreline had shifted. The trees stood in different places. Even the moon appeared at another angle. Only one thing remained unchanged. The figure beneath the lake. It was standing in exactly the same place. exactly the same position, exactly the same height, as though everything around it could change. But it never did. Daniel enlarged the oldest photograph in his collection, the one Walter had shown him, then the ranger's photograph, then the recovered camera footage, then his own images. He aligned them side by side. The figure matched perfectly, not almost, perfectly. The shoulders, the posture, the distance between the eyes, even tiny tears in the clothing. Nothing had changed, not in 40 years, not in 70 years. Impossible. He used facial recognition software. The result appeared within seconds. No match found. Daniel tried something different. He isolated the face and increased the exposure. More details slowly emerged. A scar above the left eyebrow, a broken front tooth, a deep cut across one cheek. The face looked strangely familiar, but not from any missing person report. He opened the engineering documents again. One faded group photograph showed the workers who built the dam. Daniel zoomed in. Standing at the edge of the picture was a man with the same scar, the same broken tooth, the same face. The name beneath the photograph read, Elias Voss. Official records said Elias had died in a construction accident before the valley was flooded. Daniel searched for the accident report. It was missing. He searched newspaper archives. Nothing. No obituary, no funeral notice, no burial record. It was as if Elias Voss had never existed, except for that single photograph. Daniel drove to the home of the retired archivist. When he showed him the picture, the old man went silent. His hands began to tremble. I've seen that face before. Where? The archivist swallowed. In another photograph. He disappeared into a storage room and returned with a faded newspaper. The article covered the opening ceremony of the dam. Government officials stood smiling in front of the lake. Daniel looked closely. Standing far behind the crowd, near the water, was the same man, Elias Voss, watching. The newspaper had been printed 2 years after his reported death. The archivist whispered, I thought it was a printing error. Daniel compared both photographs. The faces were identical. Not older, not younger, exactly the same. Then Daniel noticed something even stranger. Elias wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking directly at whoever had taken the photograph, watching the photographer, just as the stranger beneath the lake had been watching Daniel from the very beginning. Daniel's phone suddenly rang. The caller ID displayed only one word, unknown. He answered. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then a familiar voice whispered, You're standing where I stood. The line disconnected. Daniel replayed the call. The recording contained only silence. The whisper was gone, as if it had never happened. He checked the call log. No number, no timestamp, no record that anyone had called him. Yet he had heard the voice. He knew those words were real. You're standing where I stood. Daniel returned to the lake one last time. He left a sealed envelope inside his truck. If he did not return by sunrise, Walter would find it. Inside were copies of every photograph, every map, every journal page, every piece of evidence. At exactly midnight, Daniel entered the water again. This time, he ignored the abandoned belongings. He swam directly toward the drowned church. The stone doors stood slightly open, as though someone had recently entered. He pushed them wider. Inside, the church was untouched. Wooden pews still faced the altar. Candles rested where they had been left decades ago. A cracked stained glass window filtered faint moonlight through the water. Everything should have been destroyed. Instead, it looked preserved. Waiting. Daniel's flashlight reached the altar. Behind it stood a narrow staircase leading downward. He descended slowly. Each step took him deeper beneath the church. The water grew colder. The silence became unbearable. At the bottom, he found a massive iron door. Heavy chains wrapped around it. Ancient locks covered its surface. Every lock had been broken. From the inside, the door stood open, just enough for darkness to spill through. Daniel aimed his flashlight into the opening. Nothing. Only endless blackness. Then, a voice. Soft. Almost gentle. Daniel. He froze. It was his mother's voice. She had died 12 years earlier. The voice came again. We've been waiting. Daniel shut off his radio. He knew no signal could travel this deep. The voice continued. Not through the radio. Inside his helmet. Inside his mind. He forced himself toward the doorway. His flashlight beam finally reached something. Footprints. Fresh footprints. Leading out of the darkness. Toward him. one after another. Then they stopped. Someone was standing directly in front of him, invisible. The water around him became strangely warm. Slowly, a face appeared. Not Elias Voss, not the stranger, his own. Daniel stared at himself. Every scar, every wrinkle, every detail was perfect. The other Daniel smiled. He did not. Then his body camera began recording on its own. The duplicate raised one hand and pointed behind Daniel. Daniel turned. The iron door was closing. Without making a sound, he spun back. The duplicate was gone. Only bubbles drifted upward. Daniel rushed toward the exit. The church staircase had disappeared. In its place, a long stone hallway stretched into darkness, lined on both sides by dozens of silent figures. Each one watched him. Each one had a different face. Each one wore the clothes of someone reported missing from Blackwater Lake. At the end of the hallway, one figure remained motionless. It wore Daniel's diving suit. Its helmet visor slowly lifted. Inside, the face smiled. Then, every light on Daniel's suit went out at once. Complete darkness surrounded Daniel. His flashlight was dead. His helmet light was gone. Even the glowing display on his wrist had disappeared. Only his breathing remained. Slow, uneven, loud inside the silence. Then, it stopped. Not because his air had run out, because something else had begun breathing beside him. One breath, then another, so close that he could feel the vibration through his diving suit. Daniel reached for his emergency light. It flickered once. For less than a second, the hallway was empty. Every figure had vanished. Only wet footprints remained on the stone floor, leading away from him, toward the surface. Daniel followed them. He no longer knew whether he was trying to escape or being led somewhere. The footprints ended at the church entrance. Above him, moonlight filtered through the water. The exit was only a few meters away. He kicked upward. His lungs burned. The surface grew closer. Then, a hand wrapped around his ankle. Daniel looked down. No one was there. Only darkness. The grip tightened. His body camera continued recording. The final image showed Daniel reaching toward the surface. Then the video shook violently. Static filled the screen. The recording ended. 3 days later, Walter found Daniel's truck exactly where it had been parked. The envelope was still inside. Every document remained untouched. Daniel's diving equipment was never recovered. Neither was Daniel. The authorities searched the lake for 2 weeks. Divers found nothing. No body, no damaged gear, no trace that he had ever entered the water. The only evidence was the recovered body camera. Investigators claimed the final footage had been corrupted. Most of the recording could not be restored. Only the last 6 seconds survived. The footage showed the empty surface of Blackwater Lake at sunrise. The camera floated alone. Then, without warning, a face slowly appeared beneath it, looking directly into the lens. Not Daniel, not Elias Voss. Someone else, a stranger. The video froze. Before the file ended, a single frame appeared, enhanced repeatedly by investigators. Hidden in the reflection of the water, stood a lone figure on the dock, watching the lake. The official report identified no one. Months later, visitors returned to Blackwater Lake. Most saw nothing unusual. Some reported hearing footsteps beneath the water after midnight. Others claimed they saw someone standing below the surface, perfectly still, waiting. Every witness described a different face, but every story ended the same way. The figure always smiled first, and somewhere beneath the black water, the stranger is still waiting.